Hi, hello. My name is Jade Van Clay, also known on the web as Backline Nurse. Welcome to my very first episode of Backstage Triage. This is a brand new podcast where I'm going to be talking with people who make the art that we love about their experiences navigating medical and mental health care as freelance and gig workers. Today, I am talking with Nashville guitarist and one of my best friends, Jordan Merrigan. We're going to be talking about his time in COVID lockdown, as well as his experience as a survivor of the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting in Las Vegas. Sounds pretty serious, and yeah, it is, but I promise there is never a shortage of comedic relief when this guy and I are hanging out. All right, let's get into it. Guitarist for Dylan Schneider and creative genius behind the musical project The Light in the Dark. Tour manager for America's own yodeling child prodigy, Mason Ramsey. Teen idol of the band Paradise Fears. Best photographer in Nashville. One of my best friends in the entire world, Jordan Merrigan. Jordan, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I don't know if I was actually a teenager when I was in Paradise Fears.
No, but you were.
So was I idolized by teens?
You were definitely a teenager. Were you?
I was actually. When I first joined, I guess I would have been 18 or 19.
Yep. But you were like the grandpa of the group.
I was the oldest, yeah. They were probably more teen idols than I,
But teens still idolized you.
Oh, that's cool.
That's what I've decided.
Okay.
Anyway, to make this work. Number one, Jordan. Are you vaccinated?
Whoa. Right out of the gate. I have had my first shot.
Which one?
I got Pfizer, and I get my second shot this week.
How did you feel after your first shot?
Like physically or both? Okay, so physically, I felt totally fine. My arm got a little sore, hardly though at all. I felt relief, I think is probably the best word. And obviously I knew the full relief wouldn't come until after the second dose, but it just felt like a step forward after a year of just kind of treading water.
Yeah, I definitely felt that emotional. I think I cried the first shot. I think I cried the second shot too, to be honest with you. And the nurse totally acted like she was used to it. Like the people have had to have been having emotional reactions.
Breaking down constantly in this thing. I anticipate having a pretty big, like a bigger reaction emotionally after the second one. Like until I feel like fully there.
Yep.
I'm kind of like anticipating that being pretty emotional because it's very
it's
exciting.
It's very symbolic too.
Yeah.
Of, overcoming one of the worst years that any of us have endured. So you mentioned arm soreness, and I just want to give a little tip to anyone listening and yourself for your next shot. The reason that your arm gets sore, basically it gets tight, just like if you work out a muscle and it gets tight because you overused it or whatever. So I usually recommend that whenever I give injections, people get it in their dominant arm. This doesn't matter as much for a two-step shot because you have to get it in opposite arms. But I usually recommend people get a vaccine in their dominant arm just because you move it around more during the day. So it's less opportunity for it to get tight, which is the reason that it gets sore. Also, warm compresses help loosen up that muscle. Treat it as any tight muscle that you've ever had.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize this. Yeah, the soreness came from just a tightness. You would think it had to do with like the puncturing of the needle, but
it's your muscle being like, "Hey, what was that?"
Yeah. Whoa. What do I got? What do we got here? Okay. Great. I'm absolutely going to request that.
Jordan, did you ever get COVID-19?
To my knowledge, no. I have gotten tested many times. They were all negative. I had, and the reason I say to my knowledge is because I did have like a few pretty close calls.
How many times have you texted me to be like, this person I saw tested positive. What do you think is going to happen to me?
What do I do? Yeah, a few, indeed. Yeah. Well, and I live with two roommates, both of whom tested positive within a week of one another, and I tested negative.
I still can't believe you didn't get it.
Me either. I think I've gotten like 9 or 10 tests total over the course of the last year. And
which one was your favorite?
All have been negative. There was one that the gentleman, I believe it was a gentleman who administered it. I hardly felt it. This guy like had a magic touch.
Are you sure he got in there?
I can't be for sure because my eyes were shut very tightly, and I was just thinking of anything else, but no, that would be my favorite one.
Shout out to that guy, wherever you are.
That guy was at
Nashville public health worker.
Urgent care clinic that I went to.
He's got the magic touch.
He had a magic touch. He really did a great job. There was another woman who she kind of made it sound like it was my fault that it hurt so bad.
What?
Because, I was like scrunching my face up.
Oh yeah, that does make it worse.
And she was like, I can't get up there when you do that face. I'm sorry. And
same goes for getting an injection. If you tense up your arm, it's going to hurt worse.
Oh,
just so you know.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Honestly, you had warned me this going into the shot. I hardly felt it. And it's been a while since I've had a shot of any kind. So I was like a little nervous. I was fully anticipating like not enjoying it, but it
wasn't too bad.
I hardly felt it.
You enjoyed the hell out of it.
I was
Loved every minute.
I would have taken all the pain for it could have hurt much worse. And same thing with my second shot. If I do experience any side effects, I'll gladly be bedridden for a day if it,
I honestly didn't have I think the only side effect that I had with my first shot was the arm soreness. And then the only thing that I really had after the second was I kind of felt a little feverish just for a few hours that night. And I had a headache, but I get headaches all the time. So I just kind of like, whatever. Yeah. But that was about it. I really didn't have very much. And I got the Pfizer one as well. Okay. And with Pfizer, the Pfizer vaccine is 85% effective after your first dose. So right now you are 85% protected against the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
I didn't know it was that high.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which is still extremely high for a vaccine efficacy. Right. For reference, the flu vaccine is usually somewhere between like 60 and 70% every year. So you are very well protected at this point, but it is important to get the next one if you can.
Of course. Yeah.
And also get the first one whenever you can. Jordan, how long have you been in Nashville?
How long have I been in Nashville? It's been a little over 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah. It's flown by. I moved here December of 2014.
Wow. I can't believe it's been that long. The next thing I was going to ask you about, the friggin' year 2020 nearly killed us all. What was it, March? What happened in March of 2020 that shook Nashville?
The tornado.
Yes.
That hit. Yeah.
I was not here yet, so I want to make that clear to people that are listening. But tell me about your experience.
Yeah. So like the night of it was wild because the tornado came through. I think I was in bed and it was after 11 p.m. It might have even been midnight. I didn't know this until the following day, but it touched down about a mile north of my house where we're sitting right now. I live on the west side of town. So it touched down there and just went straight across through Germantown, East Nashville, all the way out into like Mount Juliet. It was on the ground for like something crazy, like 70 miles or something.
Oh my God.
A lot of times tornadoes touch down for a couple minutes or something, but this thing just went and went and went. And that night was frightening because one of my roommates, his brother lives in East Nashville, right near where it went. So we all woke up, the sirens went off, we all went downstairs, and he was on the phone with his brother, and it had just went through their neighborhood. In East Nashville, and the restaurant across the street got flattened. We didn't have any damage at our house, even though it did touch down so close to us. Like I didn't hear it or anything. There was a lot of damage about a mile away, but his house, my roommate's brother's house, they had broken windows and the neighborhood got hit really, really hard. So we were all downstairs at our house with him on speakerphone, and he was like walking outside and describing, this was minutes after it had come through.
Oh, wow.
And he was like describing the scene to us. You could just hear it in his voice. It was less about what he was saying and more like how he was saying it. And you could just hear this like complete shock in his voice, like looking around. There's trees down, there's power lines down, there's buildings flattened. Like,
yeah.
So that was the night of it was very, very surreal in that way. And he was okay. Thankfully, him and his wife were both okay. And we just kind of had to wait. And obviously the next day is when you just really realized like, holy crap. Like obviously a couple of people died. So many homes were destroyed. Businesses were destroyed.
There's still damage by where I live in East Nashville.
Yeah.
Just a couple blocks away.
Yeah. Yeah. You still see plenty of effects from it. I just remember those first couple days, obviously very solemn, seeing people posting about, hey, can I come stay somewhere? But just as quickly as people realized how bad it was, the volunteer efforts began like immediately. One story I remember being told, I guess with natural disasters, there's like these companies that will come in from, obviously other places to help with the cleanup.
FEMA, Red Cross.
Yeah. And there was this like a tree service specifically that had been hired to come in, and they apparently showed up to a site where they were supposed to clear out a bunch of like branches and down trees. And they got there and the work had all been done already.
Wow.
By volunteers.
Wow.
And they literally pulled up and they're like, well, I guess there's nothing to do here. And they even said, we've never seen anything like this.
That's incredible.
So the community just instantly sprung into action, and it was kind of not unfortunate, but I had shows that weekend.
Didn't you tell me that you had just started a job at the Basement
So
East?
that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
So at the time, the acts who I tour with, who Jade mentioned earlier, neither of them were doing much touring. They were kind of both focusing more on writing and recording, and I just play on the road with them. So I had been like looking for other work. I was like, okay, I need to find a job in Nashville. And I was like, I really want to, if possible, find a job in the music industry. And a friend of mine happened to be like kind of the night manager at the Basement East. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, I don't know if you guys are hiring. Like, I'd really love to work at a venue. I think that would be really fun. And the Basement East is an incredible venue. And he's like, yeah, we can find something for you. Like, I know you have a lot of touring experience, and we would, come on, do some training, and we'll get you on staff. So the night before the tornado, I worked my first training shift.
Wow.
And it was so much fun. I had such a great experience. Everyone in the staff was so welcoming and accommodating. And there was no like, oh, you're the new guy, like, giving me the crappy jobs to do. It was just like everyone was so on the same. It felt like people who had been working there for years didn't act like they were superior in any way.
Right.
It was such a family vibe, and at the end of the night, we're all just hanging out after we're done cleaning up. We're just all hanging out and talking in the venue, and it was just, I was so excited. It's like, oh, this is going to be the perfect job.
Right.
So excited. And then 24 hours later, a tornado destroyed. So the Basement East was destroyed in the tornado, and it has since been rebuilt. They've been finally having shows again there, which is so exciting. And I've heard the rebuild, it looks great in there, but obviously that night, that certainly factored into my experience and the emotions I felt, because I was like, wow, I just started there and now it's destroyed. Like, what?
And not to mention, March 2020 was right before or right at the start of pandemic lockdown.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't have been even weeks after.
It was a couple weeks later where everything really started getting shut down. Yeah.
Yeah.
The volunteer effort was just unbelievable. And so I did happen to have shows that weekend, and I remember just not wanting to go play them because it wasn't even a question of if you were going to go help. Right. Even if you didn't know anyone who was directly affected, like, you were going to just go help and volunteer. That was the Nashville way, to speak to the proximity of the pandemic. Like, that's what stopped the volunteer efforts. People had to stop getting in big groups to help each other. We didn't have much time to even recover before that. Right. Before the pandemic started.
Isolation. When you're alone a lot, you contemplate. And when you have a lot of time to contemplate, sometimes it's not good.
The next thing I want to get into, 2020, a year of massive change throughout the country, from protests, pandemic, natural disasters. It's just been a massive year of change, I think, for everybody. And so I want to bring up something that I've noticed about you.
Uh-oh.
As your friend.
No.
No, this is not, I want to make sure I'm saying this in a way that like conveys how this is a good thing and not a bad thing, I guess. So I've always known you, Jordan, to be kind of a peacekeeper. You're friends with everyone, and genuinely, not like you're pandering in any way, like just genuinely kind and want to accommodate people and everything like that. And we come from a very, very conservative area in South Dakota, and I've always known your values to be pretty progressive, and you care so much about people and everything like that. But I drove up to visit you for the first time when I moved here in Nashville in September after all year in Minneapolis. And I pulled up, and in the back window of your car with your little South Dakota license plate was a BLM sign. And that, I think, it was so moving to me because it just kind of signified, like, and I saw this in Minneapolis too, people that normally wouldn't rock the boat, so to speak, are feeling that it's no longer possible to do that, you know, and it's kind of our social responsibility to advocate for folks that need support. So how do you feel like you've evolved in that way over the past year?
Wow, what a great question. Thank you for all those kind words again.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, so I guess I'll speak to that sign specifically and where that even came from. Probably was a month after the killing of George Floyd. There was a big march in Nashville that I took part in. I think there was like over 10,000 people that participated in the march, and it was organized.
That's amazing.
It was organized by teenagers.
What?
It was like a group of like 4 or 5 teenage. I think they were I think it was all girls, teenage girls.
Teenage girls. I'm telling you, they are going to save the world.
We have some.
They are the future.
The future is bright because that generation is really incredible.
They are.
And I remember, I think they just started like a social media page and set an event like, hey, we're going to do a march this day. And I think they said they anticipated like maybe like 700-800 people is what they thought would show up, and 10,000 showed up. And during a pandemic, too.
Gosh.
And so many, pretty much everyone was wearing a mask. You know, it was obviously as outdoors, which does help, but there was large crowds. Everyone was wearing a mask. There were people on the way, like passing out water bottles, passing out masks if you needed a mask. I think you're right. I think I've very much been always like a non-confrontational person.
Like, I know what your personal values are.
Right.
You know, and I've always known that. But yeah, I definitely noticed that I think you and a lot of other people who are normally that way as well kind of felt like, okay, it's irresponsible at this point to not
absolutely
talk about it.
And I think my experience, and I think it feels like this was the experience for a lot of people, I think why I may have always been more non-confrontational is because I didn't think there was anything I could say that would actually make a difference.
Right.
Posting something on the internet just felt like it wasn't actually going to do anything.
Empty.
Yeah, so it was more like, why say anything because it's not going to make a difference? Like, I know how I feel. I know what my values are. I know that I believe in equality.
And you live by example.
Yeah.
In what you do.
And I don't surround myself with people who think less of certain types of people. So I had always sort of thought of it on a more micro scale, and just feeling like anything I said wasn't going to make a difference. And around that time, I remember as soon as I saw that march, I was like, okay, I know I have to go to this. I think I just realized, like, even if I have, with whatever limited influence I have on other people in the world, it still is an influence, and it's still always worth speaking up, because you never know who you might have an effect on. And it's not necessarily even about that. It's just like showing kind of solidarity.
Amplifying the voices of people who are marginalized and showing support. You were talking about at the marches, people wearing masks, people were congregating even though it was a pandemic. And some people used the fact that it was a pandemic to dissuade people from getting together. But from my point of view, I was working at the Minnesota Department of Health in their epidemiology division at this time in the Twin Cities, so very close to home. I don't know a single person that I was working with that disagreed with what was going on.
People, experts in the pandemic were,
because racism is a public health issue as well.
Yeah.
And when folks are seeing their brothers and sisters get killed, what is most risky? Being silent when this happens, or getting together during a pandemic, you know?
Right.
So after that, we spent time figuring out how could we better support the Black communities of Minneapolis as far as COVID goes, testing, things like that after the marches and during. How can we better support these communities and show that we support what they're doing? And it was very much we have to be out here because silence is not an option.
We understand the risks involved,
Yep.
and we're willing to take them because it's the cause. It's not a new one, obviously.
Right.
Like, this has been going on for so long. And it just felt like so many people, like you said, reassessed how they viewed the issue. I think people realized we have to not be afraid to talk about it. And even if you feel personally like you're living by the right moral compass and the people you surround yourself with are living by the right moral compass, there's still so much you can do.
I just want to add a disclaimer, kind of a content warning here for those who are listening. We're going to talk about a mass shooting that Jordan is a survivor of, a mass casualty event. If that's something that is triggering to you, I would encourage you to rejoin us either in the next episode or closer to the end of this one. So, Jordan, October 1st, 2017, you were playing with Dylan Schneider, right? And the guys in your band at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, in the United States, mass shootings happen far too often. So I'm just going to recap a little bit about what happened that day for anybody who may not have it fresh in their memory. So this was the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival on the Las Vegas Strip. On October 1st, 2017, between 10:05 and 10:15 p.m., a 64-year-old man whose name I will not give air to, fired more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. He killed 60 people and initially wounded 411, but the panic and chaos in the aftermath caused injuries to elevate all the way to about 867. He was discovered about an hour later dead in his hotel room from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This shooting remains the deadliest mass shooting committed by a single individual in modern U.S. history. The Route 91 festival itself started in 2014. That year in 2017, I think it ran from September 29th to the 1st. That was the last day of it, right?
Yeah, it was. I don't know exactly when it started, but I know that was the last night. Yeah.
That was the last night of it for that year.
For that year, right.
Yeah. And there were over 22,000 people there when this happened. Jordan was there playing with Dylan Schneider and the rest of the guys in their band. And I was hoping, Jordan, that you would talk as little or as much as you're comfortable with about that day.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to talk about it. So yeah, we had played earlier that day. We got in the day before and we were all so excited because it's a big festival. It's in the country world. It's on the Las Vegas Strip. I mean, it's super unique. You know, a lot of country festivals are in like more rural areas. Right. So the fact that we were flying to Las Vegas to play a show was just like so cool. So we got in the day before and got to go out that night and just got to experience Las Vegas life and had a blast. And then that next day, the day of the shooting, we played in the afternoon on the secondary stage. So there was kind of the big main stage and then another smaller stage. So we played at around like 3 or 4 p.m., I think, at that stage. And it was one of the best shows we had ever had. Dylan Schneider, who I play for and tour manage for, is from Indiana. And we had been at it for a couple years, or about a year we had been playing shows. He was growing. He was starting to reach a bigger audience. And most of the touring we had done had been in the Nashville area in the southeast. So that was our first like far away show. And a bunch of people there knew the words to his songs. The energy was just incredible. The crowd reacted so well to our set. To this day, it's all of one of our favorite shows that we've ever played. So we played around 3 or 4 p.m., went back to our hotel, which was the Mandalay. We were staying at the Mandalay.
I didn't know
on like the 19th floor.
Oh my gosh.
So we went back to put our gear away and to just kind of decompress a little bit, and then came back over to, it's across the street, obviously. So we came back over to the grounds around probably like 7 p.m., ate dinner, and they had bars backstage. And so we were just all, kind of basking in the show we had played and what an amazing, cool weekend it was. This was a Sunday night. Our flight was like Monday at 6 a.m. So, and we had kind of had our big night out the night before.
Right.
So that night we were like, we'll watch the show and then honestly probably just head back and get to bed because we have to be up early for our flight and everything.
It was what was it, Jason Aldean that was playing?
Yeah, and we watched a couple acts before him, and then he went on probably around like 9:30 or something, and there was 10 of us total in our crew. So there was 6 band members including Dylan, and then we had 4 crew members with us. So there was 10 of us in our traveling party, and we were all pretty spread out, throughout the night. Everyone kind of broke into smaller groups, and some people were watching the show. Some of us were backstage, just kind of, we kind of spread out naturally throughout the night. And right around that time, I was backstage with two other guys from Dylan's crew. So like the stage was pretty much directly behind me,
right?
Like maybe like 20 yards.
The main stage?
The main stage where, so Jason Aldean was playing about, 20 yards behind me on the main stage. And they had this cool kind of like tiki bar kind of setup that we were sitting at, having a couple drinks. And I remember us all sitting there just like looking at each other like, man, we're exhausted.
Yeah.
Like we were about, we were getting ready to call it a night, honestly.
Right.
And then we're sitting there and the first round of shots went off and we thought it was fireworks, which has been widely reported by a lot of people. It sounded like fireworks. Then there was another burst And I remember thinking after that second burst, like that was gunshots. But I was like, we're in Las Vegas. Like, I'm sure shots get fired occasionally. Like, obviously my mind didn't go to like, there's probably a mass shooting about to take place.
Yeah, you'd never suspect that.
Yeah, it was honestly like, oh man, I hope everything's okay. And like, just figured it was something near the strip or something.
Yeah.
And then when the kind of the next round started, you started hearing like unrest and people yelling. And I looked to my right and people were just running towards me from the crowd. So they were breaching the backstage area, just running. And they were running kind of right at us. And that's when we realized what was happening. And we got up, myself and the two guys I was with, who I'm just not going to use anyone's name in case they would want any sort of an anonymity. Sure. So we got up and just turned around. And I just remember turning around, and the first thing I saw was people climbing underneath the stage. And this is a large festival stage. So, underneath is kind of like piping and framing. So people were kind of climbing down into that area, and I just didn't have much time to react. So I was like, okay, let's go there. So we ran in there, and as I was running in, I heard bullets hit the ground behind me, probably within 5 or 6 feet behind me. And then as we were starting to climb under, there was a girl, she was probably like mid-20s, who was sitting on the ground, just like frozen, like hadn't been shot or anything, was just like in total shock and like crying and like just kind of shaking. And I stopped and like, I'm like, come here, come on, like come with us, kind of like took her under the stage with us. And we kind of climbed back underneath a little ways and climbed in a bit and then stopped, to kind of like assess what was happening. And obviously this whole time there's like automatic gunfire happening this whole time. And
so like really fast,
really consistent. And at this point, I thought it was multiple shooters.
What made you think that?
Because of the volume of gunfire and the sound. It sounded like they were on the ground. Like it sounded like they were in the festival. And the Mandalay is shaped. It's kind of got 3 like wings to it. It's like kind of a V shape facing the festival grounds. So the reverberations from the gunshots was just like kind of echoing around the building and around all the nearby buildings. So you couldn't get any sort of sense of where this was coming from. So my thought was like, okay, there's people on the ground walking through the festival. Like they came in from the street or something and they're just shooting at people on the ground, was what I was imagining.
Were you under the main stage?
So at this point, we're under the main stage. Okay. We had crawled in a little ways and just kind of expecting someone to come around the corner. Because there's probably 40 or 50 people underneath the stage.
And how were people reacting at that time that you could see?
Just, crying, yelling, screaming, just disbelief, like trying to piece together what was actually happening. Again, not knowing where this was coming from.
And again, this was only about a 10-minute window that this all happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so once we got underneath the stage, would lay down on the ground, and then every once in a while there'd be kind of another push of people, and we would go further underneath the stage. And then we would hear these like crazy sounds above us of like, I don't know if it was equipment breaking or like like I know he did shoot the stage up quite a bit. So like every once in a while we would crawl kind of back under the stage further, and then there would be another sound and we would like continue on, and then we would kind of stop for a little bit, and it kind of went on like that for the majority of it. And I remember thinking too, a little ways in, because there would be brief pauses when he was reloading, and we would kind of maybe think it was over.
Right.
And
I bet it seemed like forever.
10 minutes of that. Yeah. It felt like a lot longer.
Yeah.
And there would be those brief pauses and be like, okay, maybe it's over. And then it would start again. And I remember just be like, what the hell is going, like, how is this still going on?
Right.
And a little ways in,
it was like over 1,000 rounds that he fired. Yeah. That's just crazy.
And I remember thinking too, like, oh, I must now be hearing police fire. Again, thinking it was someone on the ground, because there was obviously security and there was people who could respond nearby. So after a while, I'm like, oh, I must be hearing like police taking the shooters
returning
out. Returning fire is kind of what I figured out, because it just kept going and going and going. And in no way could I piece together like why it was. You know, I remember pulling my phone out at one point and just like kind of trying to figure out what was going on, reaching out to the other guys, just like in these brief little moments under the stage, just trying to like figure out what was happening. And
so they weren't like your band and crew, they were elsewhere? You were with two guys?
I was with two guys. Everyone else was on the festival grounds.
Okay.
But in different spots. Like there was some guys were out in the crowd when it started, but we were all spread out. So we're underneath there, and we have this girl this girl was with us pretty much the rest of the night.
The one that was sitting and crying.
And the one that was sitting and crying. And we found out later she was a bartender at that bar, and she was bartending with her friend, and her friend was shot right next to her.
Oh my God.
So she watched her friend get shot.
Did she survive? Do you know?
I don't know for sure. I don't think so, but I can't say that with certainty. So I'm trying to kind of console her the best I can, try and keep her calm, keep her breathing. The guys I was with were doing the same for me. You know, everyone kind of was like going in and out of these different states of shock, and we're just doing our best to like stay together. And we knew like, okay, if we're going to get through this, we got to like be there for each other and support each other. So eventually the shooting stopped, and we never left underneath the stage while the shooting was going on. But once it finally did stop, we had at this point kind of made it to near the back side of the stage, and we're kind of trying to figure out what our next move was going to be. Obviously, it was very chaotic, and there's no one getting any information. For all we know, it's still an active situation.
Right.
So we're near the back of the stage, and one guy kind of left that area, and there was a gate that left the festival grounds in front of us. So he went out of the gate to kind of see what was going on, and he didn't like come back right away. So I called him and I said, "Hey, where'd you go?" And he had started going down a certain street. He's like, "I went out that gate and I took a right. It looks like there's police everywhere. Like it feels kind of secure out here." So we're like, "Okay, we'll come towards you." So myself, that girl, and then the other guy from Dylan's crew, the three of us exited the festival grounds and got out there. And by the time we got there, the way that our friend it was blocked off by police. So we couldn't go the way he had said he had gone. So we get out there, and we kind of like ducked behind some bushes, like, okay, where should we go? What should we do? And the girl we were with was actually from Las Vegas. She was a local. So she sort of knew the area a little bit. And she's like, we can go down this street, and this will take us towards wherever, I forget what she mentioned, but we can go down this street. So the Mandalay was on this corner. Across the street was the festival grounds. And then on the back side, there was a road. And that's the road we ran down. And that was the first time that I actually saw anything, like saw people who had been shot. Because being underneath the stage, like in retrospect, we were in like the safest place you could be, really, because he was shooting from an elevated area, shooting down. It wasn't until we started running down that road that we saw people who had been shot, saw people who were dead. And there was like a bunch of pickup trucks. People had like pulled up trucks to like help get people out of there. And there was like bodies being thrown in the back of these trucks. There was people sitting up against the fence with like, I remember a guy with like a hole in his leg, and there's blood all over the ground. And I remember running down that street feeling like it was completely surreal and not in like a movie. It felt like a movie scene. Yeah. And really, I remember we all just kept saying like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Like we're realizing how serious everything really was and how many people had been injured and killed. But we also had to keep moving. We also, again, thought maybe this is still an active situation. So we just kind of started running down that street, and she's like, "Oh, there's a bar up here we can try and go into." We run in there. We hardly get in the door, and people just start running out of it in a panic.
Oh my gosh.
Nothing had happened.
Okay.
It was just people got spooked and took off. So we like immediately turned around and start running. And we ultimately ended up in the MGM Grand Casino.
How far is that from the festival grounds?
It's hard to remember how long it took us to get there, but it was within a mile, I believe, pretty close by. The girl that we were with had got in touch with a friend of hers and had heard like the MGM Grand is safe, because there were a lot of false reports coming in that there were shooters in other casinos.
Yeah, I heard that.
And at one point there was a reporting of a car bomb, like there's a car driving down the strip with a bomb in it.
Oh my gosh.
And we're hearing all of this stuff, and you just don't know what to believe and what not to believe. The misinformation is an element of mass shootings that I've never considered, and like how much that contributes to the panic and just not knowing what's going to happen next. So we make it to the MGM Grand. We're on the casino floor. I remember we were sitting like leaning up against some slot machines.
Were there other people that had run from the festival there too?
Yeah, there was a bunch of people there. And then there were obviously just people who were just gambling, people who weren't at the festival.
Did they have any idea what had just happened?
It's hard to say. I think some did. I think word had probably traveled pretty quickly, but this was probably within 30 minutes. So there was probably plenty of people sitting at a slot machine who hadn't maybe checked their phone. I don't know if the casino would have made an announcement.
They didn't lock it down.
It wasn't locked down. Yeah. So we were sitting leaning up against the slot machine and finally had a few minutes to catch our breath. And then all of a sudden, there was a huge rush of people from the far end of the hallway running towards us.
Oh my gosh.
And no one heard anything. It was just panic. And
it was people that were already in the casino?
People who are already in the casino and maybe mixed in with people who had run from the festival. So we took off, ran, and ended up in this back hallway. There's a little bar restaurant off of the casino floor. So we ran into there, and then it was kind of the back entrance, like an employee entrance. And there's this little hallway in there, and that's where we ended up. And there's probably 20 or 30 people. And there was a door that led outside. There was a door that led back into the restaurant. And then there was a door that went to the casino floor. It was kind of this, back employee entrance. And there were people trying to barricade the door that went out to the casino floor. And then I was near the door that went outside. So I popped the door open to look outside. That it was a parking lot that was gated. So okay, no one's coming from this way. There's no way that anyone can come from here. So if we get that door blocked, then we, at least maybe we can be safe here in this area. And I was standing there, and then all of a sudden someone knocked on the door coming from the restaurant, pounding on the door, let me in, let me in. And people are yelling at me, don't let him in, don't let him in.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm I just kind of froze, and I let them in. I just felt okay.
Were they seeking refuge?
They were seeking refuge, yeah. And they came in, and it was 2 or 3 people that came in, and they were actually one, an older gentleman I remember was saw that people were trying to block that door into the casino. And he's what are you doing? Why are you trying to lock that? There's nothing happening out there. If anything, we should be letting people in. And again, everyone was just operating off panic.
Yeah,
and it wasn't
rational thought it
was out the window at this point.
You're in survival mode.
Yeah. So I think after a few minutes, people realized that nothing had actually happened. The thought, obviously, is there was more gunshots.
Right. When you're in that hyper alert fight or flight state, your body's going to tell you to run if you hear anything.
If someone chews a bag of chips too loud, you're going to freak. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we eventually left that back hallway and just went back into that restaurant. They had couches and chairs and stuff, and we're okay, this seems like a good spot to kind of post up. And I think it was probably around 11 p.m. at this point. So about 45 minutes after the shooting had stopped. So at this point, there's 7 of us unaccounted for.
At this point, had news gotten out to the rest of the country what was happening? Did you have anyone trying to contact you to see if you were okay?
I forget exactly when. I know I called both of my parents. It would have been 1 a.m. in the Midwest. And then my mom was on the East Coast. So it was 2 a.m. for her. I know I posted on Twitter and Facebook, and I just said, I am okay.
Yeah. You and I had been texting that day about Boy Meets World.
Oh,
I remember very well.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't find out till the next morning. I woke up with that CNN notification on my phone that there had been a shooting and this many people are confirmed dead and all, and I nearly threw up and then got a hold of you.
Yeah.
Very quickly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank God.
And that night I did speak to my mom, because she called me back. My dad didn't ever end up answering. We talked the next morning, but remember at least being able to talk to my mom and let her know what had happened and that I think I'm okay. We still don't really know what's going on. A couple friends had texted me, people who were still up. One friend of mine actually was texting me and was listening to the Las Vegas police scanner.
Oh, wow.
Because you can access those online. You can listen to police scanners. So he started listening to the police scanners and was texting me what he was hearing, which was so quick thinking of him and really helpful.
Wow.
Honestly.
What was he hearing?
It was a lot of those false reports. It was a lot of there's a report of a shooting here, there's a gunman here, there's a bomb here. And
were police investigating those false reports? Do you know?
I'm sure they were responding. I imagine, I think most of the efforts were concentrated on the Mandalay. And I think it wasn't until maybe 2 a.m. where we remember hearing, and it was reported that it was no longer an active situation. So it was 3.5 hours of not really knowing, and then hearing okay, it was one shooter, he's dead, the situation isn't considered active anymore. And over the course of the night, that's where everyone from Dylan's crew ended up, was in this restaurant. The last 2 guys didn't get there until 5 or 6 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
And there was a while where we didn't hear from a couple people, and obviously it was very stressful and scary.
6 a.m. is about when you were supposed to leave, right?
And at this point, we've had long realized like we're not getting on a plane anytime soon.
Right.
And then around like 6 or 7, they came around and they're like it's considered safe now to go.
Even to the Mandalay
But they
Bay.
said if you're at the Mandalay, then they were setting up, I think, some beds at like the UNLV basketball arena. That was like where they were sending people if you were displaced and had nowhere to go. And so we all started walking there, and walking through Las Vegas at sunrise, like in a total daze. That was such a surreal experience.
Did you still see after, people around?
Not at that point, because we were that was all pretty concentrated on the festival grounds. At this point, we're pretty far removed from that, because it was kind of a hike from what I remember. It was like a couple miles maybe that we had to walk to get to the arena. And then someone got word that they were starting to let people into the Mandalay. And so we got an Uber. I remember we called an Uber and we got in the Uber, went back over there. He kind of had to drop us off on like a back side of it. It's a large casino hotel.
I mean, God bless that Uber driver that picked you guys up. I would have been afraid, I think, to pick people up.
And I think everyone was very much on edge.
Yeah.
Certainly. And even going there felt so strange, because by that time we knew that's where he had been. We were able to get up to the elevators were in different banks. So like he was on the 32nd floor, but we took you couldn't get in those elevators. But we were on the 19th floor, so you were able to get to because it was a different set of elevators. So we were able to get up to our rooms, and everyone just kind of went to their room, and our tour manager at the time was like, all right, I'm going to get on the phone and see what we can do about flights. And thankfully, our airline was cooperative and understood, told them what the situation was, and they rebooked us all, and they couldn't get us to Nashville that day.
At this point, are you wanting to get the hell out of there, or are you just wanting to sleep?
The last place I wanted to be was in this hotel.
Right.
Like
that makes
sense. I hated it so much. Everyone was like varying levels of exhausted, and some people were kind of like, okay, like let's just sleep here for a little while. And I was always just like, I got to get out of here, get me as far away from this area as possible. And as soon as we got our flights rebooked, they couldn't get us to Nashville, but they could get us to Denver. So this is Monday now. So they got us to Denver Monday night, and then there was an early flight from Denver to Nashville Tuesday morning. Our flight wasn't until like 5 or 6 p.m. And this is, it's like 10 or 11 a.m. at this point. And we're like, we're just going to go to the airport.
Yep.
That felt like a safe place to be, like a really secure place to be. So we got to the airport probably around like 11 a.m. And I remember getting through security, and like it wasn't until we got through security and I was on the other side that I felt safe. Like for the first time since it started, over 12 hours earlier.
Did you feel like you were still in like fight or flight survival mode at that point? Or
just felt very
exhausted,
mm-hmm. Just sort of numb, and like felt like kind of like I was walking through a dream kind of. We went and got lunch. We drank a beer, which we all felt was much earned and needed. Yes. At that point. We had a lunch and a beer, and still had 6 hours till our flight. So we kind of just found an area, and we laid down and were able to get some sleep, and got out of Vegas that night, and then got back to Nashville Tuesday, like late Tuesday morning is when we landed.
How did it feel getting home?
Good. I immediately I had some friends over, which was very comforting. Just to be around, familiar, friendly faces felt really good. I was still just in such a daze, and didn't really just know what to make of anything, and constantly hearing from people and trying to do my best to like stay in touch with people and let them know I was okay. But it's also very difficult to keep up, and it's very overwhelming, just very much in a daze. A huge thing that was very helpful is some healthcare organizations in Nashville organized an event for anyone who was there. And I think it was Wednesday night is when the event was.
The same week that it happened.
The same week it happened. So shooting was Sunday. I believe the event was Wednesday. And they had counselors there, therapists, mental health professionals. And it was just an event for anyone who was there.
Did you find that there were a lot of people from Nashville that were there?
Yes. There was at that event specifically, maybe there was like 30 or 40, maybe 50. But there was a lot more that were there, that were present in Vegas, because it was a country festival and most of those people live in Nashville. So I know, and I had my friends back home told me like, yeah, the day after in Nashville was like a very, very solemn day, because everyone almost knew someone who was there. So it shook the town. It was very, very traumatic for the town, even if you weren't there, you know, because Nashville had such a presence there. So we went to that event, and I remember the first time I felt any sort of like my mind at ease, because you're just doing your best to process emotions, and you don't know how to feel. And the first thing the speaker said is like, all right, anyone who is there, you are still in shock. And I remember even just hearing that, I was like, oh, okay.
Validated your feeling.
Validated, because to shock to me was always like, you're in it for an hour. Like you get in a car accident and you're in shock for an hour and then you get out of it.
Right.
I didn't understand what shock was and how long it can last.
Yep.
For some people, it never goes away.
Right.
And they talked a lot about the chemically what happens during a traumatic event. And we were all just sitting there, and like they were just describing how we were currently feeling and then how we had felt over the last like couple days, and even during it, you know, they were telling us about what your brain does in those high stress situations. And just hearing all of that explained at like a chemical level was like weirdly reassuring to me, because
that your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was so thankful for that, for them to organize something that quickly.
That's incredible.
It was really impressive. And they actually even had a couple speakers who were in band. One of them was in that band, the Eagles of Death Metal.
Oh, yes.
The shooting in Paris. Yes. So he was there for that.
Oh my gosh.
So he spoke on his experience.
That's incredible.
And he spoke about his experience with therapy. Another guy was in a band who was playing at a festival in Canada when a tornado came through.
Oh my gosh.
And it like flipped the stage. And so people died, and it was a very traumatic event, and he spoke on his experience and his experience with therapy. So just what they were able to do in such a short amount of time was like incredible and so helpful.
And were you able to set up counseling or anything like that afterwards?
Eventually, yeah. So we had to leave on Thursday for shows. We had a show on Friday and a show on Saturday.
So the first time you got on stage after the shooting was 5
days later.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How did you feel? Were you scared? Were you anxious?
I was a little anxious. I was still in shock. You know, I was still like so close to it. And even driving there, I was like, this is the last thing I want to be doing, because it was also a really big show. It was in Pittsburgh. We were opening for Cole Swindell at a sold-out venue of 5,000 people.
Oh my gosh.
An outdoor venue also.
And so you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm putting myself in your shoes. Like, all of you as a group have just been through this incredibly traumatic experience, and you're going to entertain folks that probably didn't experience it firsthand, or maybe, you know, don't understand that you're still in shock and things like that. You're still processing. Did that go through your mind? Like, what are people going to think? Or
it was more like, I guess I thought of it more from my own perspective of like, the shooting happened at a concert at my place of work.
Yeah.
You know, this is like what I do for a living. I've probably spent more time at a show than almost anywhere else, you know, so it was more of like maybe being worried that a place that had always felt so safe to me was going to feel like tainted and was not going to feel safe. That was a big fear going in. All I wanted to do was just stay at home, you know, and just be with friends and process. And honestly, looking back, it was like playing the show was actually extremely cathartic and really powerful. And part of it, you know, we weren't on the stage when it happened. Like I think a lot about like Jason Aldean and his band, the fact that they were actually on the stage when it happened and the associations they have. Has to be incredibly difficult. I honestly felt more nervous after the show watching, because that was more of what my surroundings were like during it. So we played the show, and it was like really, really powerful. And we had a great moment backstage beforehand. And there's a part of our set where we kind of do this long extended intro, and Dylan kind of talks over the top of it. And he talked about, hey, we were there and experienced it. And I remember just like really being like lost in the moment and looking out at the crowd of people and them looking back at me and just being like, this is where I should be. Being on stage right now is exactly what should be happening.
Do you feel like it was like you reclaimed that experience? Yeah,
I didn't let him win, so to speak, or let that fear sort of win.
Right.
And I didn't really realize that fully till after the fact. And some people I talked to are like, yeah, maybe if you had waited a month to play a show, you would have just built up all this anxiety towards
Yes.
it. The fact almost that we had to play so close to it was probably
It's like ripping a Band-Aid off.
Exactly. And we had 2 shows that weekend, so we played that first show. And again, I remember being out in the crowd afterwards, and I had some friends from the city that I was with watching the show, and we were like 10-15 minutes, and I looked at them, was like, could we leave? Is there anywhere we can go, like a bar nearby or something? Like I can't be here right now. Again, feeling that felt a lot more like familiar.
Yeah, that's, the nature of post-traumatic stress. So you experience a traumatic event. Post-traumatic stress is your brain trying to keep you from ever experiencing that trauma again. So when you associate an action with that traumatic event, like being in the crowd after you've played a show, your brain is going to be screaming at you like, get out of here. This is dangerous.
Right,
It's trying to save you.
Yeah.
It's your brain trying to protect you. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
But it can be really, really stressful, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, at that point, I'm like, gosh, is this how it's going to always feel at a show? Like, am I never going to feel safe at a show again? Like, it's part of the reason I fell in love with music in the first place, is because a show is always such a welcoming and inclusive place to be. And I just love that energy at a show, that anyone can forget the troubles of the world and go there to just get lost in the music and the experience. And I was like, is that asshole? Like, did he just take concerts from me?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
And we got through that weekend. We had another show the next day, and then got back on Sunday. Then we didn't have another show for a few weeks. So then kind of had some time to rest and sort of continue to recover. And so once we got back, there was a lot of resources made available to us counseling wise. Like Vanderbilt University offered free group therapy to anyone who was there. There was we were getting a lot of resources sent to us from, Dylan's management and various people in Nashville and various organizations in Nashville, where there was a lot of outreach. I definitely felt very supported by the community. And obviously spent a lot of time talking with friends and family, and but the community really knew that people needed to be taken care of, and that this doesn't go away quickly. The effects were going to be long lasting, and there's right and wrong ways to process and deal with it all.
And grief and trauma manifests itself in waves a lot of the time.
Totally.
It hits you when you're not expecting it.
Absolutely. So I forget how long it was before we went to that first group therapy session.
Did you go as a group?
Not all of us. So again, there was like 10 of us. I think like four to 6 of us went, and that was the only one we ended up doing as a group. And it was certainly helpful. It was just to have that safe space to talk. And then from there, some people went to therapy right away. I waited a couple months till I went, because I felt it was interesting how everyone experienced and processed it differently, because there was 10 of us. We all had such different experiences. Some people felt like it affected them more up front. Like I felt pretty okay mentally, like initially in the first like couple months. And I think largely just because of all the support I had from the community and my friends and my family. But I remember getting 2 or 3 months in and realizing like, okay, I need to talk to someone, and then I need to like process this in the healthy way. So I went 3 or 4 times to a therapist and had a good experience. I had never actually gone to therapy before that. So this was my first time, and it was very focused on trauma. That was one of her specialties, was trauma. So we did do some trauma specific techniques. We did EMDR.
Mm-hmm. Hey there, it's Jade chiming in for just a second to explain EMDR. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a form of psychotherapy that's been around since the late 1980s. The premise, and I'm going to oversimplify here, is based upon addressing psychological pain resulting from trauma with a similar attitude as you would address a physical wound. You know how when you get a scratch on the roof of your mouth that would heal if only you could stop tonguing it? Yes, I realize that's a line from Fight Club. Bear with me. Psychological trauma is similar. The more that healing process is disturbed, in this case by recalling the traumatic event and causing yourself even more physical and psychological stress, EMDR basically aims to get your brain out of its own way in the process to healing from psychological trauma. It uses some sort of visual stimulus, often fluorescent light to force your brain to take voluntary control of your eye movements while recalling traumatic memories. The actual neurobehavioral process is incredibly complex, so I'm not going to get into the weeds about it, but it has been proven to be incredibly effective at treating post-traumatic stress disorder. If this is something that you think you could possibly benefit from, I would recommend visiting the website emdr.com to learn more about it. Or if you'd like to find clinicians in your area who provide EMDR therapy, visit psychologytoday.com. Okay, back to Jordan.
I know there's a few different techniques. The one she used was a flashlight, and she would have me think of the experience while I followed this light that she was holding. She would kind of move it back and forth. And I do remember feeling like, whoa, this is actually pretty crazy. It's almost like you can't control it because of the things that are firing in your brain.
Yep.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's somewhat it's mystifying to me, but I do have patients that have very much benefited from that therapy regarding trauma. And it's really remarkable. It's not something you would ever think works. And yeah.
It sounds a little hokey going in. And you're like, all right, now follow this flashlight. It's almost, it feels like just like hypnosis almost. Yep. I didn't continue on for too long. I didn't have my therapist was great. I just didn't have a great connection with her.
Yeah, that happens.
Which happens. Yep. And it's all about finding the right person, but it certainly was helpful. And honestly, I think a large part of why I maybe didn't seek it out. And again, there were guys in the group who went a lot and still do to this day, but we kind of had a built-in support group. Anytime we went on the road together and we're in a van for 6 hours and like we talked a lot about it, and that was invaluable. Like had we not done that, because we were on the road pretty often after that. And yeah, we almost had our own little traveling support group.
Right.
And it was really, really helpful because we all experienced it so differently that we were able to kind of talk each other through it. And we had all experienced the same thing. So we knew that we could all relate and had that common ground. And so that was, I think, a large reason of why I personally, because I didn't just have to sit and dwell with it. Like I had a place to talk, and I had people I could talk with about it. And that's always been really helpful for me, even if it's not a licensed professional that I'm talking to. Just the act of talking through it was really helpful for me. So I think that almost was my therapy. And obviously to this day, that continues to be the case, that we all can confide in one another about it.
It sounds like to me that you really felt supported by the music community here.
Hugely.
And the resources that are here in Nashville. It seems like they were very proactive in helping you guys start to process what had happened.
Very much, yeah. I think that initial response, at least for me, was the most helpful, to have someone to guide me through that early stage of shock and the early stages of trauma and everything. But the efforts certainly went on for a while. I think the free therapy was available for quite a while.
Was that how you found your therapist?
No, that I actually found through my health insurance.
Oh, okay.
But the free group therapy that they offered, I think was available for, a few months or something. So it was certainly, there was a great initial immediate reaction that I think they understood that this is something that all of these people are going to have to deal with the rest of their lives, obviously, but it's going to take a lot of time to process and work through. So the resources were ongoing.
It sounds like the initial response here was kind of a debriefing. What we call in the humanitarian community is psychological first aid.
Yeah. Okay.
Essentially assessing the needs of the folks that have been just traumatized as a group. And figuring out what their needs are, making it very known that those resources are available to you, because it's so critical to have that support established in the first, I don't know however many hours, first few days after a very traumatic event. And it's been shown that that significantly reduces the risk of prolonged post-traumatic stress. So that sounds like they really did well.
I can attest to that. Yeah. Again, because having that just being explained, what's happening in the brain during that was just made me feel a little more sane, I guess. Or
that your brain's doing what it's supposed to do.
Exactly. That there's going to be steps to it and a process to it. And they were very good about reassuring us that here's the typical steps, but you can jump between steps. You can jump forward 2 steps, then back 3. No one experiences it the same way, and it's not perfectly linear. And it's not like, okay, it's been 6 months, you better be okay now.
I'm fixed now.
Now I'm good. They were good about reassuring us that there's no right or wrong way to kind of process this. You know, there might be right or wrong ways to like medicine.
Negative coping skills.
Yeah, there might. Yeah, there you go. That's the word. There might be wrong ways to do that, but as far as the actual, just like the way you're feeling and the way your brain is processing it, there's no right or wrong way. Like everyone's story is different, which was super helpful. Yeah, that's interesting to hear that. That's a known thing, that like the initial response is in some ways maybe the most important.
It is. It's very, very important. Actually, at USD, at the psychology department in our hometown, Jerry Jacobs was the head of the disaster mental health program there, and he was a real like pioneer in the field of study of psychological first aid in humanitarian emergencies.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah,
wow.
And he was my dad's mentor in grad school, so I learned a lot about it.
Cool. Wow. USD.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's something that's very much used, especially in conflict zones and, you know, mass casualty events, things like that. And so it sounds like, at least here in Nashville, they did a really good job of getting that to you guys as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Very thankful for that. Yeah, speaks more to, like we were saying earlier, what a nurturing
Nashville.
Nurturing Nashville. How true that really is.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for talking with me about that.
Of course.
We have not talked in that much detail about it as friends, even since it happened. And like, I know I've like checked on how are you doing, things like that. But
right.
I think that's easily the most traumatic event you've probably ever experienced.
Far and away. Yeah.
And it's really, I think as friends, it's hard to navigate. Like, I don't want to trigger that, even though I'm a mental health professional, like it's really like, I don't want you to have to think about this right now if you don't want to, you know?
Yeah.
But,
well, and I think if we had seen each other within a few months after it happened, I forget when the first time I would have seen you.
It was probably at least a few months. I was in Omaha, you were in Nashville. So
maybe it was a year.
It could have been.
So I think after enough time goes by, I completely understand that you're not just going to bring it up necessarily.
I think it's important to just like especially friends who have experienced something very traumatic, if you don't want to ask them outright, like, hey, what happened to you? You know?
Yeah.
At least just let them know, give space. Hey, I'm here if you do want to talk about it. Don't feel obligated to talk about it. Just
Absolutely.
Making yourself present and available.
Yeah. And even you were always very supportive and there for me. I didn't have to tell you the story for you to still be there for me like you were. But I'm glad that we had a chance to talk through it. Now it's a story I really don't mind telling, you know, and I completely understand anyone's hesitancy. Like you said, you don't want to take someone back to that place, but unwillingly. Yeah. But I will say that sometimes what can be more difficult is when people like pretending like it never happened.
Yeah.
The news cycle moves pretty quickly. So the further you get from the trauma, the further the country gets from it.
The more isolated you probably feel.
I was talking to someone recently, and we were talking about trauma, and they had experienced a trauma. And I had said, yeah, I mean, I kind of understand how you're feeling. And they're like, what do you mean? And they knew I was there, but it had been so long. They're like, oh my gosh, of course. Like you were at Vegas, and like just to show like it's so real and present for you. But
it's something you carry with you
other
forever.
People sort of move on from it, and understandably so. Like I said, I do the same thing. So if you ever know someone who's gone through a trauma, don't be afraid to bring it up, because that might be exactly what they want to talk about, because it can feel pretty alienating sometimes for people to like kind of pretend that this thing that weighs on you so heavily and something you carry with you, that you know that they're coming from a place of compassion, but it kind of your brain will start to feel like they forgot it happened, or they don't want to acknowledge that it happened.
It makes you feel more alone in it.
Makes you can kind of feel more alone. Yeah. I think the way you phrase it's great. Like you don't have to be like, so what happened, or what'd you do? Like even just be like, hey, I know like you went through this and I haven't seen you since it happened. Just know if you want to talk about it, I'm here for you. And just opening that door can be super helpful. And I've never held any resentment towards anyone for not having asked me about it, because I completely understand where they come from. But it's something I'm happy to talk about, because I think I did learn so much about trauma and just the brain and how it reacts to things. I know I've been able to pass on certain things to other people who have experienced something. At this point, it happened and I made it through, and I'm still a professional musician, and I'm still getting to play music to pay my bills, which is unbelievable. So I'm happy to
absolutely
talk about it.
So I'm going to wrap up by mentioning October 1st, 2020, 3 years to the day after the incident, you released some new music.
I did. Yes. And that was
That was a really cool night.
That was unintentional.
It was. You didn't do that on purpose.
Well, no, I didn't. And it's funny because I realized like a week out, because I set the release date like a month ahead of time. Over the course of the pandemic, had a lot of time. So as you've probably gathered, listener, primarily I'm a touring musician. That's what I've been doing for almost 10 years now. And especially in the last 4 or 5 years here in Nashville, that's been my primary job, has been a touring musician. And I love it so much. I can't wait to start doing it again.
Yes.
But obviously during the pandemic, with not being able to do that, I've had a lot of time.
Haven't we? Actually, I have not had any time.
Yeah, Jade's been.
I've had the opposite of time.
Off saving the world, and I had a lot of time to myself. I fortunately have felt pretty creatively inspired throughout the course of the pandemic. So I spent a lot of time, especially last year, working on my own music. I've always written music since I picked up that Dan Electro guitar at On Cue. I've always been writing music, but was always in a band or always worked with other people and hadn't had a ton of time to like focus on my own stuff. So I spent more and more time working on my own music over the course of last year, and then eventually finished a couple songs that I was really proud of and released them. And they
under your project The Light and the Dark.
The Light and the Dark
Yes.
is the name of the project. Yeah. And the first 2 songs I released last year, again, I just like set an arbitrary release date.
Didn't even think about it.
Well, here, I think the release date was technically October 2nd.
Oh, gotcha.
But
everything. Because it was at night. It was like 11.
Midnight.
Yep.
East Coast,
11
which
here.
is 11 p.m. in Nashville, which is like 10 or 9 in where Vegas is. So it literally came out like 3 years to the day, almost to the minute of when the shooting was. And I didn't really realize that till like a few days before.
Yeah. You had made an Instagram post about it.
Yeah. It was really emotional and like in a positive way. Like I'm still playing music. Like, like the guy didn't win. Like I'm still doing this.
And now we're at the stage where the pandemic is not going to win.
Yeah, right.
The finish line is in sight.
We're near that finish line. Yeah. So that was I'd kind of forgotten about that the music came out that 3 years later.
We popped some champagne.
We did.
By the fire with folks.
With some friends. And,
outside, socially distanced.
Yes. Very safe.
One of the songs that you released under The Light and the Dark was a song called Prove It, which I love. And that is the song that's going to take us out of this episode, the very first episode of Backstage Triage.
Thank you for having me on the show and trusting me to be your first guest. It's an honor.
We see each other all the time.
We do, and I love you so much, and we've known each other for so long, and I'm so proud
Love
of
you too.
Thank you so much for having me, and everyone listening, continue to follow Jade and her journey, and she can be a great resource for dealing with the shit that we've all been having to deal with.
Aww.
Because it's not easy, and it's okay to cut yourself some slack.
It's okay to say it sucks.
And it really sucks. So continue to follow her because she's doing a lot of really, really great and helpful and educating things. So
thank you. All right, folks, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of Backstage Triage. I am so excited for what I have coming up for you all. This is my first podcast ever, and I want your feedback. Please find me on social media at Backstage Triage on Twitter and Instagram, and my website, backlinenurse.com. Tell me what you liked, what you think I can do better. In fact, the person who leaves me the most useful feedback on any platform is gonna get a shout out in next week's episode. Just to let you know, I will have a Backstage Triage Patreon page as well as a patron program page on Podbean. There will be bonus content released with each and every episode. This week only, the bonus episode will be free to you all as a thank you for checking me out and as a preview of what's to come. The bonus episode will be outtakes from my interview with Jordan. Here's a little preview of that bonus episode.
And then also the Spill Canvas.
Oh, yes.
Early on was a huge influence.
On both of us.
On both of us, absolutely. Yeah. And their guitar player, Dan Ludeman, who is actually a second cousin of mine, which is such a South Dakota thing. They went on to obviously be very successful and experienced national success. And they were on TRL.
Oh my God, they were?
They were.
I interviewed Nick Thomas for the for the high school newspaper. Do you remember?
I do. I remember you were like, we were freaking out. It was such a big deal.
It was such a Hail Mary pass. I don't know how I even made that happen, but I was like, I'm just going to email them.
Did they play In Vermilion?
No, it was in Sioux Falls.
It was a Sioux Falls show that you went up to, probably at the Ramcoda.
Yep,
or
it was at the Ramcoda. Yep. Once again, I'm Jade Van Clay, and this was Backstage Triage. Here is Prove It by Jordan Merrigan under his project, The Light and the Dark, out now on Spotify and pretty much wherever you find your tunes. I will see you next Monday.
To break it, made a list of all the things I know. All I wanna do is see if I can prove it. I made a living and I hate it. Got pretty good at faking love. Now all I wanna do is see if I can prove it. Can't say what I'm thinking of. Now all I wanna do is see if I can lose it. I'm sick of all the things I'm making. Is any of this making sense? Now all I wanna do is see if I can prove it. Got back from a vacation. Everybody asked where I was from. And all I wanna do is find a way to prove it. If this is all a simulation,